Homelander stood in the hallway outside the apartment, cape still, smile fixed, eyes scanning for the familiar signs of fear. Raised heartbeats, shaking hands, that instinctive recoil he'd trained the world to give him. Instead, the man in front of him just waited, keys in hand, expression neutral, almost distracted. No panic, no awe, no hesitation. Security cameras caught the pause. Analysts would later slow the footage frame by frame, trying to pinpoint the moment something broke. Homelander's smile tightened. His jaw flexed. He spoke first, louder than necessary, asserting space that no one challenged. The man simply nodded, said okay, and stepped aside to let him pass. That was it, no defiance, no bravado, just indifference. Homelander left seconds later, pulse elevated, thoughts racing, replaying the encounter again and again. He checked reflections. He listened for laughter that wasn't there. By nightfall, he'd ordered background checks, surveillance, and quiet monitoring on someone with no powers, no record, no significance. And somewhere between the second and third report, a terrifying possibility settled in. What if this wasn't resistance, but the beginning of something he couldn't control? If someone with no power can make the strongest man in the world hesitate, what happens next matters. This story doesn't end with a fight. It escalates into something far worse. Subscribe once to follow where this fear spreads, because once it starts unraveling, there's no putting it back. Homelander had been having a good day. Ratings were up. A staged rescue downtown had gone exactly to plan. The crowd screamed his name on cue, cameras catching every perfect angle of his smile as he hovered just long enough to let the applause peak. Fear and adoration blended the way it always did, indistinguishable to anyone except him. By the time he returned to Vought Tower, the city already felt smaller beneath him. That was when the report came in. It wasn't flagged as urgent, just a minor note from ground-level security, a civilian encounter logged during routine patrol. No threat, no incident, just an interaction that felt off. Homelander read it once, dismissed it, then read it again. The words were clinical, but the implication lingered. Subject displayed no visible signs of distress, no elevated heart rate, no submissive body language, maintained eye contact, responded politely. Encounter duration, 12 seconds. 12 seconds shouldn't have mattered. Homelander told himself that as he descended into the residential building later that evening, boots barely touching the floor. The hallway smelled like detergent and stale air. Normal, safe, forgettable. Exactly the kind of place people panicked in when he showed up. He stopped outside the apartment door, listening. A heartbeat steady, not racing, not spiking. That was wrong. He knocked once, hard enough to splinter wood if he wanted it to. The door opened immediately. The man standing there was unremarkable in every measurable way. Mid-30s, average build, no visible weapons, no attempt to hide fear because there was none to hide. Homelander smiled. "Evening," he said, voice warm, practiced. "Just a quick check-in." The man blinked once. "Oh, sure." No stutter, no gasp, no widening of the eyes. Behind Homelander's smile, something twitched. He stepped closer, invading space the way he always did, waiting for the recoil. It didn't come. The man simply shifted his weight, keys jingling softly in his hand, more inconvenienced than intimidated. "Everything okay?" the man asked. The question landed wrong. Cameras in the hallway recorded Homelander's pause, barely half a second, long enough to be meaningless to anyone else, long enough to feel like an eternity to him. "Everything's fine," Homelander replied, tone tightening just a fraction, "just making sure." The man nodded, cool. That was it. No challenge, no admiration, no fear. Homelander left without another word, floating back into the night with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. His heart rate was elevated. His thoughts raced, replaying the interaction from every angle, searching for the trick. There had to be one. Back at Vought Tower, he demanded files. Not loudly, quietly, efficiently. He wanted everything: financials, social media, medical records, psychological profiles, the works. The results came back empty. No criminal history, no extremist ties, no soup markers, no unusual data points. Just a man with a job, a lease, and a life that didn't intersect with power in any meaningful way. That made it worse. Homelander watched the hallway footage again and again. He focused on micro-expressions, on posture, on the absence of tells. The man hadn't been brave. Bravery implied choice. He hadn't been defiant. Defiance implied intent. He just existed. By morning, Homelander was irritable. He snapped at staff. He botched a line during a live interview and had to redo it. The city noticed something was off before anyone could say why. Vought executives dismissed it when Homelander brought it up. A civilian who didn't react correctly, one of them said, barely looking up from a tablet. That's not a threat, that's a PR non-event. Homelander didn't argue. He didn't need to. Instead, he ordered discreet surveillance. No uniforms, no visible pressure, just eyes and ears. He told himself it was precaution. That was the word he used. Precaution. The man went about his life unaware. He went to work, bought groceries, talked to neighbors. He didn't change routines, didn't check over his shoulder, didn't behave like someone who knew he was being watched. Homelander watched everything. He waited for the moment when fear would surface, when the delayed realization would hit and panic would finally set in. It never did. That night, Homelander hovered above the city longer than usual, listening to the noise below. Sirens, traffic, heartbeats by the thousands, all of them familiar, all of them predictable. Except one. He found himself drifting back toward the same building without meaning to. Down below, in an apartment lit by a single lamp, the man sat on his couch scrolling through his phone, unaware that the most powerful being in the world was watching him with something dangerously close to uncertainty. Homelander clenched his fists. This wasn't how it was supposed to work. And for the first time in a very long time, he couldn't tell if the problem was the man or himself. Above the city, unseen and unacknowledged, Homelander made a decision that would quietly change everything. He would not ignore this. The surveillance started the way all Vought surveillance did, quietly, professionally, with enough distance to pretend it wasn't obsession. 2 cameras appeared across the street, disguised as municipal upgrades. A third was embedded in a neighboring building under the cover of a maintenance request no one remembered filing. Digital footprints were mapped, purchase histories flagged, commute times logged down to the minute. Every piece of data flowed into a secure room 3 floors beneath Vought Tower, where analysts waited for patterns to emerge. They didn't. The man's routine was aggressively normal. Wake up, shower, coffee, work, lunch at the same place twice a week, a walk home that cut through the same park every evening. No sudden changes, no paranoia, no tightening of schedules. If anything, the longer the watching continued, the clearer it became that he had no idea he was being watched at all. That unsettled Homelander more than any resistance ever had. He reviewed the feeds personally, late at night when the tower was quiet. He didn't sit. He hovered inches above the floor, arms crossed, eyes locked on screens that showed nothing wrong. Analysts spoke in careful tones, offering theories they didn't believe in themselves. Some people freeze under stress, one suggested. Delayed reaction. How delayed? Homelander asked. The analyst hesitated. Hours, days. Homelander said nothing. He'd been watching for a week. The man never flinched. To test the hypothesis, Homelander adjusted the environment. A Vought patrol flew low over the park during the man's evening walk, sonic pressure rippling through the air. Other civilians froze. Phones came out. Heart rates spiked across the block. The man paused, looked up briefly, then stepped aside to let a frightened couple pass. He resumed walking once the noise faded, expression unchanged. Another test followed. A staged incident outside his workplace. Screaming, shattered glass, a soup landing hard enough to crack pavement. It was the kind of chaos that usually left civilians shaken for days. The man exited the building, took in the scene, and calmly detoured down another street to avoid the mess. No fear. No recognition. Homelander's irritation deepened into something sharper. He wasn't being challenged. He was being excluded. The man's indifference wasn't defiance, it was absence. Homelander's presence wasn't registering as meaningful stimulus. That broke an unspoken rule of the world. Vought executives noticed the shift in Homelander before they understood the cause. He canceled appearances, shortened interviews. His smiles became brittle, his patience thinner. A producer was reduced to tears after missing a cue by half a second. Ashley confronted him privately. "This is becoming noticeable," she said. "If there's an issue." "There's no issue," Homelander replied flatly. He left before she could finish. The boys noticed too. Huey first because he was the one who noticed patterns. Homelander's patrol routes overlapped strangely. He lingered near places that didn't make sense, neighborhoods without strategic value, no soup activity, no optics. Butcher didn't care at first. "He's losing it," he muttered, "takes time." Then Frenchie pulled up a map. "Non," he said quietly, "this is not random." They traced the overlaps, a workplace, a grocery store, a park, all centered around one ordinary man who on paper didn't matter at all. "Who the hell is that?" Huey asked. "No one," Butcher said, "which is why I don't like it." Homelander escalated again. This time he removed the distance. He appeared on the Man Street in full uniform, landing with a controlled shockwave that rattled windows and sent a ripple of fear through the block. People screamed. Some ran. Others froze. The man stepped outside seconds later, drawn by the noise. Homelander turned slowly, locking eyes with him across the street. This was supposed to be the moment. Up close, no ambiguity, no distance, just raw presence. The man met his gaze, squinting slightly as if adjusting to the light. "Everything okay?" he asked again, louder this time to be heard over the settling debris. A few heads turned, cameras rolled, the words were harmless. They hit Homelander like a slap. His smile flickered, just for a moment. He felt it, an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, a creeping heat behind his eyes. He could end this in an instant, a gesture, a threat, a demonstration. He didn't. Because this wasn't about force. Force would prove nothing. Homelander nodded stiffly and turned away, lifting off without another word. The crowd buzzed, confused by the anticlimax. The man shrugged, apologized to a neighbor for the noise, and went back inside. Footage spread online within minutes. Commentators didn't know what to make of it. The encounter didn't fit the usual narrative. No speech, no intimidation, no awe, just an exchange that felt wrong. Homelander watched the clips loop on repeat. He listened to the audio, to the casual tone, the lack of reverence. He imagined himself from the outside, reduced to an inconvenience rather than a god. That night, he dreamed of standing in a crowd where no one looked up. He woke furious. By morning, he had issued new orders, deeper surveillance, psychological profiling, background interviews with anyone who'd ever interacted with the man. No contact, no pressure, but total visibility. Vought hesitated. "This is excessive," a risk officer said. "There's no threat vector." Homelander leaned forward slowly, "Then find out why." The officer swallowed and nodded. Across the city, unaware of the escalation forming around him, the man went about his day as usual. He felt a vague sense of being watched, dismissed it as paranoia, and focused on work. He had no idea that his continued normalcy was doing more damage than any act of rebellion ever could. Because somewhere high above the city, Homelander wasn't just watching anymore. He was spiraling. And the longer the man refused to react, the more dangerous that spiral became. Vought's first mistake was assuming this could be managed like every other issue Homelander caused. They didn't see fear, they saw deviation. In the executive briefing room, the incident was reduced to bullet points and timestamps, a civilian interaction anomaly, a pattern of fixation, a potential optics risk if allowed to grow unchecked. No one said the word fear, not out loud. That would imply weakness, and weakness was a narrative they refused to sell. Ashley stood at the head of the table, tablet glowing softly as she summarized. Homelander has requested expanded surveillance on a non-powered civilian. No criminal ties, no media footprint, no ideological affiliations. A hand went up. So why are we entertaining this? Because, Ashley replied carefully, Homelander isn't letting it go. That landed heavier than any data point. Vought had learned long ago that Homelander's obsessions didn't fade. They metastasized. Ignoring them didn't make them disappear. It just delayed the fallout until it was louder and harder to contain. The solution, as always, was control. They authorized a quiet intervention, not force, not intimidation, just enough presence to reassert the proper emotional hierarchy, a polite visit, a casual reminder of who mattered. 2 Vought representatives were assigned, clean records, friendly faces, no uniforms. They would introduce themselves as part of a community outreach initiative, ask a few questions, gauge reactions. Fix the glitch. The man answered the door with the same neutral expression Homelander couldn't stop thinking about. Hi, one of them said, smiling. We're with Vought, just following up on a recent incident in the area. Oh, the man replied. Was that the loud landing? I figured something like that. No tension, no flattery, no fear. They asked routine questions. He answered honestly. He didn't ask for autographs, didn't ask about Homelander, didn't even mention him unless prompted. When they left, one of the reps exhaled sharply. He's not hiding anything. The other nodded. That's what worries me. Their report reflected that discomfort. The language stayed professional, but the conclusion was unavoidable. Subject exhibits no abnormal psychology, no dissociation, no bravado, simply unaffected. Ashley read it twice, then sent it upstairs with a recommendation attached. De-escalation advised. Homelander rejected it immediately. He talked to them, Homelander said flatly. Did he ask about me? No, Ashley admitted. Did he seem impressed? No. Homelander's jaw tightened. Then you didn't fix anything. Vought escalated anyway. They tried reframing. Internal PR teams began subtly adjusting coverage. Less Homelander dominance, more reassurance. They floated the idea that true power didn't need spectacle, that calm responses were normal, expected, healthy. The goal wasn't to elevate the man, it was to lower the ceiling around him. It backfired. Online discourse shifted. People started rewatching the footage, slowing it down, asking why Homelander had paused, why he'd left first, why the civilian hadn't reacted correctly. Questions spread faster than answers. Homelander watched it all in silence. The city felt louder now. Every laugh sounded pointed. Every neutral face felt like a mirror. He began scanning crowds compulsively, searching for the same blank indifference. He found it more often than he wanted. The boys picked up on the shift almost immediately. This is new, Huey said, scrolling through clips. People aren't scared the same way. Butcher grunted. They're curious, worse. Frenchie leaned back, frowning. Fear works when it's simple. This is complicated. Kimiko watched a slowed-down video of the hallway encounter, eyes narrowing. She pointed to the man's face, then mimicked his expression. Neutral, calm, not brave, just present. She doesn't see him as special, Huey realized. No, Butcher said quietly, and that's driven Homelander nuts. Vought attempted one final corrective measure. They arranged an unscripted charity appearance near the man's workplace. Full cameras, crowd control, a perfect opportunity for awe to reassert itself. Homelander would arrive, smile, save someone, leave everyone breathless. He did everything right. The crowd reacted on cue, cheers, phones raised, applause swelling as Homelander descended in a blaze of sound and color. Then the man stepped out of the building across the street. He stopped, watched for a moment, checked his phone, decided he didn't have time to wait and crossed the street behind the crowd, head down, navigating around people rather than through them. He didn't look at Homelander once. The cameras caught it. Not because anyone intended them to, but because someone zoomed out. The clip went viral within the hour. Not titled "Homelander Saves the Day." Titled "Why Didn't He Look?" Homelander saw it alone in his apartment, fists clenched so tight the floor beneath them cracked. He replayed the moment again and again, searching for hidden defiance. There was none. Just a man choosing to walk away. That night, Homelander ordered something Vought couldn't spin, suppress, or quietly fix. He wanted the man brought in. Not arrested, not harmed. Questioned. Ashley froze when she heard. "That's a line," she said. "You cross it and we can't protect you from the fallout." Homelander turned slowly. "Protect me from what?" She didn't answer. Because for the first time, she didn't know. Across the city, unaware of the decision closing in around him, the man finished dinner, washed his dishes, and sat on his couch scrolling mindlessly through his phone. He felt that familiar fleeting sensation again, that sense of being watched. He dismissed it. Above him, something had already been set in motion. And this time, there would be no cameras to soften what followed. The car that picked him up was unmarked. No sirens, no flashing lights, just a black sedan pulling to the curb as he left work, the window rolling down to reveal a woman in a neat jacket with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi," she said. "We're with Vought, this won't take long." He hesitated, not because he was afraid, but because he was tired and calculating how late this would make him. After a moment, he nodded and got in. That small, reasonable decision would echo far beyond the back seat. Inside Vought Tower, Homelander watched the live feed from a private conference room. The man sat across from two representatives, hands folded, posture relaxed. No restraints, no raised voices. Everything about the setup screamed voluntary cooperation. Homelander leaned forward anyway. The questions were gentle, background, daily routine, thoughts on SUPs in general. The man answered plainly, occasionally shrugging when he didn't have much to add. He wasn't evasive. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't performing. "Did Homelander scare you?" one of them finally asked. The man paused, not because the question rattled him, but because he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "I don't really think about him," he said. "I mean, he's around, that's all." In the control room, Homelander's fingers dug into the edge of the console. "That doesn't make sense," the interviewer pressed. "Most people have strong feelings." The man tilted his head. "I guess I don't." There it was again. Not defiance, not denial. Absence. The interview ended shortly after. No breakthrough, no moment of revelation. The man was driven home, thanked for his time, and released with an apology for the inconvenience. Vought filed the report under resolved. Homelander didn't move. "Bring him back," he said. Ashley turned to him slowly. "We can't justify that." Homelander didn't raise his voice. "You don't need to justify it to him. You need to justify it to me. The city felt the shift before it understood it. Homelander began appearing in places without announcement, not saving anyone, not posturing, just watching, hovering over intersections, standing at the edge of crowds, listening. Cameras captured his stillness, his narrowed gaze, the way he seemed to be searching for something no one else could see. Public reactions changed. People didn't cheer as loudly. They clapped out of habit, then stopped. The uncertainty bled into the air, subtle but infectious. If Homelander was watching instead of performing, something was wrong. The boys felt it too. "This isn't intimidation," Huey said, watching footage. "This is anxiety." Butcher shook his head. "No, this is worse. He's looking for permission." "For what?" Butcher didn't answer. Back in his apartment, the man noticed the helicopters first, not the news ones, the quiet ones that didn't broadcast. He noticed patrols lingering longer, faces glancing at him, then away. He felt pressure building around his life without anyone ever touching him. He called in sick to work. Homelander noticed immediately. He descended onto the roof of the man's building that evening without announcement. The building creaked under the weight of his presence. Residents froze in their apartments, holding their breath. Homelander knocked. The man opened the door a few seconds later, wearing a t-shirt and socks, surprise flickering briefly across his face before settling back into neutrality. "Oh," he said, "it's you." Homelander stepped inside without asking. The apartment was small, ordinary, no weapons, no symbols, no hidden screens or conspiracies, just a couch, a table, a half-read book. "You don't react," Homelander said, voice low. "Why?" The man frowned slightly. "To what?" "To me." The man considered that. "I don't know what reaction you're looking for." Homelander circled the room slowly, every movement deliberate. "Fear," he said. "Respect something." The man leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. "I don't really feel those on command." That was when the silence changed. Homelander stopped moving. The air thickened, pressure building, the kind that usually made people crumble without a word being spoken. The man shifted his weight, uncomfortable now, but not afraid. "I'm not trying to insult you," he added genuinely. "I just don't think about you much." Homelander laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You should." The man met his eyes. "Why?" The question wasn't brave. It wasn't challenging. It was honest. Something in Homelander fractured. He left without another word, shattering the doorframe on his way out, the damage more accidental than intentional. The building shook. People screamed. The man stood in his kitchen, heart racing for the first time, not from fear of Homelander, but from confusion at the intensity of the encounter. That night, Homelander didn't sleep. He replayed the conversation over and over, searching for subtext, for manipulation, for hidden contempt. He found none. The man hadn't wanted anything, hadn't tried to prove anything. That made him impossible to dominate. Vought panicked. "What did you do?" Ashley demanded the next morning. "Nothing," Homelander replied. "I listened." "That's not comforting." Outside, media speculation exploded. Leaked footage, anonymous sources, whispers of Homelander losing control not through violence but fixation. The narrative slipped just enough for doubt to creep in. People started asking a dangerous question. If Homelander needed fear to function, what happened when fear stopped working? Across the city, the man packed a small bag, not to run, just to get space. A friend's couch, a few days away. He didn't know that Homelander was already watching the live feed of the apartment hallway, tracking every second of absence. Silence had become a variable, and Homelander was no longer reacting to it. He was afraid of what it meant. By the time morning came, the city had adjusted its posture. Nothing obvious had changed. Trains still ran. News anchors still smiled. Vaught's stock ticker still scrolled green more often than red, but the rhythm underneath it all had shifted like a machine running slightly off beat. People spoke more quietly about Homelander, not with outrage, not with rebellion, with uncertainty. That uncertainty was poison to him. Homelander hovered above the skyline just after dawn, arms folded, cape barely moving. He watched the streets for signs of correction, fear snapping back into place, people resuming their roles. Instead, he saw hesitation. Pedestrians looked up, then away. Phones came out, then slipped back into pockets. No one screamed. No one cheered. They waited. In Vought Tower, emergency meetings stacked on top of each other. Ashley paced between executives, legal advisors, and PR heads, all of them talking past one another. Every solution assumed the same thing, that fear could be reignited if properly framed. "We push a rescue," someone suggested. "Big, emotional." "He needs to look stable," another added. "Controlled." Ashley stopped packing. "He doesn't want to perform." The room went quiet. That admission landed harder than any leaked footage. If Homelander wasn't interested in reassuring the public, then the public couldn't be reassured at all. The old equation, power plus spectacle equals control, had lost a variable. Homelander didn't attend the meeting. He didn't need to. He was already elsewhere, watching a live feed from a highway camera miles away. The man was there, stepping off a bus with a small bag over his shoulder, blending into a group of commuters. He wasn't hiding. That bothered Homelander more than if he had been. Homelander followed at a distance no one could perceive, keeping high, keeping quiet. The man crossed streets, stopped for coffee, checked his phone. No urgency, no tension, just movement, ordinary and uninterrupted. Homelander's chest tightened. He landed 3 blocks away, out of sight, and walked the rest. The man noticed him only when Homelander spoke. "Why did you leave?" The man turned, surprised but not startled. "I needed space." "From me?" The man shrugged. "From everything, it got weird." Homelander stared at him, searching for the telltale signs of a lie. Elevated pulse, defensive posture, none of it was there. Just mild irritation, like someone interrupted mid-thought. "You don't get to decide that," Homelander said. The man frowned. "Decide what?" "When I'm a problem." The man exhaled slowly. "I didn't say you were." Homelander stepped closer. People across the street froze, pretending not to watch. Phones lifted just enough to capture shapes without context. "Then why did you leave?" Homelander asked again. "Because everyone started acting like I was dangerous," the man said, "and I'm not." That sentence landed wrong. Homelander laughed softly, a sound with no humor in it. "You made me dangerous." The man shook his head. "I didn't do anything." "Exactly." Homelander felt the familiar itch at the back of his mind, the impulse to end the conversation, to reassert reality the only way he knew how. One push. One demonstration. The city would remember. But he didn't move. The man met his eyes, waiting. Not defiant, not submissive, just patient. Homelander turned away first. He vanished into the sky, leaving behind a crowd that didn't know whether to breathe again. The footage went viral within minutes. Commentators didn't know how to frame it. There was no violence, no threat. Just proximity and restraint. The absence of spectacle forced interpretation, and interpretation fractured. Some called it maturity, others called it instability. Vaught's internal metrics plummeted. Fear-based engagement dropped across all platforms. Focus groups reported confusion and mixed feelings. The word awe disappeared entirely from sentiment analysis. But the most alarming data came from somewhere else. Subs began hesitating. Not openly, not dramatically, but in small, measurable ways. Response time slowed, risk tolerance dropped. A few declined assignments without clear justification. The myth of invincibility, Homelander's shadow, had always carried them forward. Now the shadow wavered. The boys noticed the pattern before Vought admitted it. "He's contaminating the system," Frenchie said, scanning reports. "Not by attacking it, by existing wrong." Butcher clenched his jaw. "This ain't power, this is a bloody virus." Huey watched the footage again, focusing not on Homelander but on the man. "He's not doing anything," he said quietly. "That's the problem," Butcher replied. "There's nothing to fight." Vought escalated anyway. They issued a quiet relocation order, protective custody under the guise of safety, a private residence, controlled environment, limited exposure, not a threat response, a containment narrative. The man refused. "I didn't ask for this," he told the handler. "I just want to go home." "You don't have that option anymore," she replied. The refusal triggered protocols no one wanted to acknowledge. Homelander watched the exchange remotely, teeth grinding. He hadn't ordered this. He also hadn't stopped it. That night the man was escorted, not forcibly but firmly, into a Vought-owned building on the outskirts of the city. No cuffs, no violence, just inevitability. Homelander arrived minutes later. He didn't go inside. He stood on the roof, staring down at the structure, listening to heartbeats through concrete and steel. Scientists, guards, administrators, all of them anxious. The man was calm. That calm pressed against Homelander's senses like static. For the first time in his life, Homelander didn't know what escalation would solve. Fear wasn't missing because it had been challenged. It was missing because it had been rendered irrelevant. Inside the building, a generator failed. Not catastrophically, just enough to darken a wing. Protocols shifted, doors locked, confusion spread. Homelander felt it. Systems compensating, people overcorrecting, fear trying to reassert itself through procedure instead of instinct. He didn't intervene. He hovered there, suspended between action and restraint, realizing too late that something irreversible had already been set in motion. Not a rebellion. Not a confrontation. A collapse driven by the absence of the one thing he'd always relied on. And below him, in a dimly lit hallway, the man sat alone, unaware that the world was reorganizing itself around his indifference. The building didn't fail all at once. That was the mistake. Emergency lights flickered on in sections, casting long shadows across polished floors and glass corridors. Security feeds rerouted. Backup generators groaned under partial load. Everything worked just enough to convince the people inside that the situation was controllable. Homelander knew better. He could hear it in the breathing, too fast, too shallow. The subtle tremor in footsteps as guards adjusted their grip on rifles they had no intention of firing. Systems weren't breaking. People were, slowly, quietly, and that kind of failure spread. Inside the containment wing, the man sat on the edge of a narrow bed, hands folded, listening to the hum of power returning in uneven waves. He checked his phone. No signal. He sighed, more annoyed than worried, and leaned back against the wall. No one spoke to him. That absence wasn't protocol, it was avoidance. 2 floors below, a junior analyst stared at a bank of monitors showing nothing out of the ordinary. No spikes, no anomalous readings, just a man sitting still. The analyst wiped sweat from his brow and glanced toward the observation window, half expecting something to change if he looked away too long. It didn't. "What are we waiting for?" he asked. No one answered. Vought's leadership had split into camps without realizing it. One group pushed for acceleration, more observation, tighter control, a show of authority. The other hesitated, trapped by a growing suspicion that intervention itself was the trigger. They argued in whispers, like the building could hear them. Homelander descended through the roof without breaking it, landing silently in a stairwell that smelled of disinfectant and fear. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. Every heartbeat in the building jumped anyway. Guards straightened. A supervisor swallowed hard and pretended to check a tablet. No one blocked his path. He walked. As he moved through the corridors, the cameras followed him automatically, algorithms prioritizing his presence above all else. Somewhere in a control room, a technician's hand shook as Homelander's icon overrode every other feed. He stopped outside the containment wing. The door was reinforced. It would have meant something to anyone else. Homelander pressed his palm against the surface, feeling the vibration of systems behind it. He could open it. He could end this entire situation in a second and rebuild the narrative from the ashes. Instead, he listened. The man's heartbeat was steady, not calm in a performative way, just steady like someone waiting for a bus that was running late. Homelander stepped back. That hesitation rippled outward. A guard noticed, then another. Someone in the control room replayed the footage frame by frame, convinced they'd missed something. Homelander turned and walked away. That was the moment everything changed. Vought's authority had always rested on one unspoken truth. Homelander acted when things mattered. If he didn't, it meant something was wrong. Panic didn't erupt, it metastasized. Orders contradicted each other. Clearance levels locked out the very people who needed access. A fire suppression system activated in an empty lab, flooding equipment worth millions. No one stopped it. Everyone was waiting for permission that never came. The boys watched the chaos unfold from a safe distance, patched into a feed that should have been encrypted. "He's not doing anything," MM said, disbelief creeping into his voice. Butcher shook his head. "Nah, he's doing the worst thing possible." Huey leaned forward. "He's letting them break themselves." The building went into full lockdown at midnight. Not because of the man. Because of Homelander. Somewhere deep in the structure, a senior executive made the call without consulting anyone else. The reasoning was simple and fatally flawed. If Homelander wouldn't act, Vought had to assert control. Containment escalated to isolation. The man's door sealed with a hiss, pressure locking the chamber. The lights dimmed further to conserve power. A calm, automated voice announced a temporary safety measure. Inside the room, the man frowned. "This is getting ridiculous," he muttered, standing and knocking once on the door. Not hard, just enough to be heard. The sound echoed down the corridor. Homelander heard it from 3 floors up. He froze. The knock wasn't a demand, it wasn't fear, it wasn't defiance. It was expectation. Homelander felt something twist in his chest, not pain, not anger, recognition. The man wasn't asking for permission. He was acknowledging reality the way it actually was, not the way Homelander needed it to be. And Homelander had no response for that. He shot upward through the building, shattering a stairwell wall on his way out, finally leaving a mark that cameras could capture. Alarms screamed. Personnel scrambled. The narrative latched onto the damage like a life raft. But it was too late. The footage that mattered had already leaked. A full minute of Homelander standing outside the containment wing, motionless, silent, leaving. By morning, the clip was everywhere. Commentators didn't ask what the man had done. They asked why Homelander hadn't. Vought's stock cratered before the markets even opened. Emergency statements contradicted each other within hours. SUPs refused assignments outright, citing unclear operational authority. Inside the containment wing, the power cut completely. Backup systems failed to engage. The door remained locked. And in the dark, the man sat on the floor, back against the wall, staring at nothing, unaware that the world outside had crossed a line it could never uncross. Not because of him, but because Homelander had watched and chosen not to act. Morning didn't arrive cleanly. It came in fragments, Emergency broadcasts overlapping, push notifications contradicting each other, analysts talking over footage they no longer understood. The city outside Vought Tower moved as if under a fog, traffic slowing without any official directive, pedestrians checking the sky more often than their phones. Homelander didn't appear. That absence was louder than any press conference. Inside Vought, authority fractured along invisible lines. Departments that had once functioned like extensions of Homelanders will now defer decisions endlessly, each waiting for someone else to take responsibility. Legal demanded clarity. PR demanded reassurance. Security demanded orders that never came. No one wanted to be the one who acted incorrectly in front of a man who had built his power on certainty. In the containment wing, the silence had become physical. The air felt stale, heavy, like a room sealed too long. The man lay on his side on the cold floor, jacket folded beneath his head, eyes open but unfocused. He wasn't asleep. He was waiting in the abstract way people do when they assume someone else will eventually fix things. The lights didn't come back on. Down the hall, an emergency team stood behind a blast door, arguing in hushed tones. Their leader, a woman with 20 years of crisis management behind her, kept glancing at a tablet that offered no solutions. Every protocol she knew ended with a question mark once Homelander refused to engage. "We can't leave him in there," one tech said. "Power's gone, air circulation's minimal." "And if we open it," another replied, "and that's the wrong move." She had no answer. Across the city, the boys watched the situation metastasize. Butcher paced, cigarette unlit between his fingers, jaw tight. Huey sat glued to a screen, tracking public sentiment curves rising and falling like erratic heartbeats. "This isn't about him anymore," Huey said quietly. "No," Butcher agreed. "It's about the fact that the big blonde bastard blinked." That realization spread faster than fear ever had. Subs stationed overseas delayed deployments, citing logistics. Smaller teams refused joint operations unless Homelander was explicitly involved. When that confirmation never came, missions stalled indefinitely. Authority didn't collapse, it hesitated. And hesitation bred improvisation. A mid-level Vought executive, desperate to reassert control, leaked a controlled statement to a friendly outlet. The headline was carefully worded. Vought confirms temporary internal review following isolated incident. The footage of Homelander, standing motionless, outside the containment wing played on a loop beneath it. The contradiction was immediate. Commentators dissected his body language with forensic obsession. Former military analysts pointed out the lack of readiness in his stance. Behavioral experts noted the absence of anger, the absence of confidence. The phrase, strategic paralysis, began trending within an hour. Homelander watched none of it. He hovered miles above the city, invisible against the pale sky, arms crossed, eyes unfocused. He wasn't listening for threats. He was listening for something else, a reaction that never came. The man hadn't begged. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't tried to run. That bothered Homelander more than any weapon ever had. Back in the tower, the containment wing finally became a liability no one could ignore. Air quality alarms tripped red. An automated system flagged the chamber as uninhabitable within 12 hours. The executive board convened in person for the first time in years, their confidence evaporating the moment the doors sealed behind them. "We open it," someone said. "And if he does something," another countered. "What?" the first snapped. "What has he done so far?" Silence answered. That silence carried weight. The vote passed by a narrow margin, recorded under a classification that implied future deniability. Security teams moved into position, not with weapons raised, but with the careful stiffness of people hopping not to be noticed. The door unlocked with a mechanical sigh. The man squinted as emergency lighting spilled into the room. He pushed himself to his feet, joints stiff, irritation finally creeping into his expression. "About time," he said, voice hoarse. "I was starting to think you forgot I was in here." No one responded. They expected anger. They expected accusations. What they got was mild annoyance, like a delayed flight. Medical staff rushed in, checking vitals, administering oxygen. The man waved them off with a weak protest, then stopped when they insisted. He let them work, eyes drifting past them, already disengaging. "Am I free to go now?" he asked. The question landed wrong. Security glanced at each other. Protocol demanded an answer they didn't have. "We need to relocate you," the team leader said carefully, "for your safety." The man shrugged. "Sure, just don't lock me in another closet." That should have been nothing. Instead, it detonated. Within hours, leaked audio of the exchange hit the networks. The phrase "another closet" became a meme, then a symbol. Late-night hosts joked about Vought losing track of a regular guy. Political commentators reframed the entire incident as corporate incompetence rather than superhuman threat. Homelander's name came up less and less. That terrified him. He descended back into the tower without announcement, landing hard enough to crack marble but not enough to satisfy the cameras. Executives froze as he passed. No one spoke. No one dared to frame a question that might reveal how little they understood him now. He reached the corridor outside the containment wing, just as the man was being escorted out. Their eyes met. The man paused, genuinely surprised. "Oh, you're real," he said, tone flat. "They kept talking like you were a system failure." Homelander felt the room tilt. He waited for the fear to arrive. It didn't. The man nodded once, polite, then followed the medics down the hall, already losing interest. Homelander stood there, surrounded by people who suddenly didn't know what to look at. In that moment, something irreversible settled into place. Fear no longer flowed toward him automatically. It had found somewhere else to go. By nightfall, Vought issued its third contradictory statement of the day. SUPs requested reassignment. Government partners demanded clarification. And somewhere deep in the city, a powerless man slept through it all, unaware that his simple lack of reaction had rewritten the rules of authority. Homelander stared out over the skyline, fists clenched, realizing too late that dominance required an audience willing to believe. And belief was slipping. The city adjusted without permission. Not dramatically, not all at once. It adjusted the way people do when they stop trusting a sound they've heard their whole lives. Sirens still wailed. SUPs still flew patrols. Vought still filled screens with smiling faces and practiced reassurance. But underneath it all, something had shifted, subtle and corrosive. Fear had stopped pointing upward. Homelander noticed it first in the smallest places. A street-level protest that didn't scatter when he passed overhead. A cameraman who didn't flinch fast enough when his shadow crossed the lens. The delay was fractions of a second, barely measurable, but it was there. Fear used to be immediate. Now it hesitated. Inside Vought Tower, the executive floors had become a maze of closed doors and half-finished conversations. Meetings ended without conclusions. Emails were drafted, redrafted, and never sent. Every decision felt like a risk. Not because of consequences from the outside world, but because Homelander might notice. Or worse, might not. The man had been relocated to a nondescript residential block under light supervision. Not guards, exactly. More like caretakers pretending not to watch. He signed the paperwork without reading it, accepted a temporary phone, and asked if there was anywhere nearby that sold decent coffee. The handler nodded too quickly and promised to find out. That normalcy spread discomfort like a rash. Vought's internal analysts began tracking a new metric they didn't fully understand. Public compliance was down, but not in obvious ways. Crime hadn't spiked. Protests weren't larger. Instead, people were slower to react, slower to panic, slower to believe. The narrative wasn't breaking, it was thinning. Homelander watched footage from the relocation without sound, replaying the moment the man walked past him again and again. No tremor, no widening of the eyes, no adrenaline spike, just recognition followed by disinterest. That was the wound. He confronted Ashley in a private office that smelled like recycled air and stress. She straightened instinctively, rehearsed fear snapping into place, but it landed awkwardly, like a costume put on too late. "Why is he still breathing my air?" Homelander asked calmly. Ashley swallowed, because removing him would look bad. Homelander stared at her. "Bad," he repeated softly. She nodded too quickly. "The optics." He turned away before she finished, the conversation already useless. Optics had always been his domain. Fear had always fixed optics. The fact that Vought now believed fear needed to be managed told him more than any report could. Outside the tower, the boys followed the shift with wary fascination. MM called it what it was first. "People ain't scared of him like they were," he said. "They're scared of the system now." Butcher snorted, "Same thing in it." Huey shook his head, "No, that's worse." They watched a news segment where a commentator openly questioned Homelander's reliability, not his morality, not his intentions, his consistency. That would have been unthinkable a week earlier. Homelander didn't lash out. That restraint frightened everyone who noticed. Instead, he began inserting himself into situations that didn't require him. Rescue operations, routine arrests, low-level incidents. He arrived early. He stayed longer. He spoke more. Fear didn't return. People thanked him. They smiled. Some even clapped. It felt wrong. In the residential block, the man settled into a routine. Morning walks, cheap takeout, television on low volume. He noticed the watchers eventually, not because they were obvious, but because they were bad at pretending not to care. "You can relax," he told one of them one afternoon, not unkindly. "I'm not going anywhere." The handler laughed nervously, unsure if that was reassurance or threat. Back at Vought, the first internal defection happened quietly. A senior PR strategist resigned without explanation, leaving behind a folder of drafts that never made it past legal. They were contingency narratives, stories for a world where Homelander wasn't the anchor anymore. No one deleted them. Homelander felt it when a smaller soup refused a direct order for the first time. Not publicly, not defiantly, just a delayed response followed by an excuse about jurisdiction. Homelander let it go. That leniency rippled. Authority had always been enforced through inevitability. You obeyed because you knew what would happen if you didn't. Now, people were learning something dangerous. Sometimes nothing happened at all. The man became a rumor. Not a threat, not a hero, a point of reference. Someone who stood next to Homelander and didn't break. Conspiracy forums argued endlessly about him, inventing powers he didn't have, motives he'd never consider. Vought didn't correct the record. They didn't know how. Homelander watched the discussions late at night, jaw tight, eyes burning. He wasn't angry at the man. He was angry at the audience. They were looking elsewhere. One evening, Homelander appeared outside the man's apartment without warning. No cameras, no entourage, just a knock at the door. The man opened it halfway, confused. "Oh, hey." Homelander waited for the fear to arrive. It didn't. "Do you know who I am?" Homelander asked. The man shrugged. "Yeah, you're on TV a lot." That answer landed harder than any insult. Homelander leaned closer, voice low. "You should be afraid." The man considered that genuinely, then shook his head. "I don't think so." "Why not?" "Because if you were going to hurt me," the man said simply, "you would have already done it." Silence stretched between them. Homelander stepped back. That retreat, small as it was, mattered. By the next morning, the story had shifted again. Analysts began using a new phrase, fear displacement. People weren't less afraid. They were afraid of different things: corporations, instability, unpredictability. Homelander was becoming part of the background noise. That night, for the first time since he'd been created, Homelander realized something terrifying. Fear didn't disappear when ignored. It moved. And wherever it settled next, it would no longer answer to him. Fear didn't announce its decision. It didn't gather. It didn't riot. It didn't burn anything down. It simply settled, quietly and collectively, on something closer and more familiar than Homelander had ever been. People stopped looking up. They started looking sideways. The first visible sign came from the markets. Not a crash, nothing dramatic enough to trigger safeguards, but a steady withdrawal. Investors pulled back from Vought subsidiaries tied directly to soup deployment. Insurance premiums spiked on properties listed as under Homelander protection. Analysts tried to explain it away as volatility, but the pattern was too clean. Confidence was leaking out. Inside Vought Tower, that loss of confidence felt like gravity changing direction. Executives walked faster. Assistants double-checked doors that had never been locked before. Legal teams prepared documents no one wanted to sign, contingencies that quietly assumed the unthinkable, a world where Homelander was no longer the final answer. Homelander felt the shift as pressure, not fear, like standing underwater without realizing how deep you'd gone until your lungs started to ache. He responded the only way he knew how, by tightening his grip. More appearances, more visibility, more reminders of what he represented. Vought pushed him into disaster zones and press events with surgical precision, trying to reattach awe to his presence through repetition. It didn't work. The crowd reactions were polite, appreciative, controlled. That was worse. In the residential block, the man noticed something was off before anyone told him. The watchers were gone, not reassigned, not rotated, gone. His temporary phone still worked, but no one called. The handler who'd promised to find good coffee never followed up. He shrugged it off and went about his day. He didn't see the connection forming around him. On social media, his image blurred into abstraction. Screenshots of him standing near Homelander were dissected endlessly. Body language experts, self-appointed and otherwise, broke down his posture, his neutral expression, his lack of reaction. He became shorthand for something people couldn't articulate yet. The one who didn't flinch. That phrase spread without a source. The boys watched the trend with growing unease. Huey scrolled through comments late into the night, eyes tired. "They're not scared of him," Huey said. "They're scared of the idea that fear stopped working." Butcher frowned. "That's academic rubbish." "No," Huey insisted. "That's what keeps people in line, not him, the idea of him." And ideas were fragile. Homelander tried to confront the problem directly, in the only way he could conceptualize it. He called a closed-door meeting with Vought's highest-ranking executives. No cameras, no handlers, just people who had built their lives on proximity to his power. They sat stiffly around the table as he entered. "You're losing control," he said flatly. No one contradicted him. "We're adjusting strategy," one executive replied carefully. "The environment has changed." Homelander's eyes narrowed. "I am the environment." That used to end conversations. Now it didn't. "With respect," another executive said, voice tight, "people don't respond to declarations anymore. They respond to outcomes." Homelander leaned forward, palms flat on the table. The surface creaked under the pressure. "Then explain to me," he said softly, "why a nobody with no power is trending higher than me." Silence answered. No one could say it aloud without sealing their own fate. The truth sat between them anyway, heavy and undeniable. Fear had found something else to cling to. Not the man himself. The implication. If Homelander wasn't absolute, if someone could exist outside his narrative, then the system built around him was vulnerable. And systems were easier to fear than gods because systems could fail. Outside, protests shifted focus. Not anti-Homelander rallies, anti-Vought demonstrations, demands for transparency, calls for oversight. Fear wasn't screaming anymore. It was organizing. Homelander hovered above one such protest, listening to chants that didn't include his name. He waited for someone to look up, to remember. Most didn't. He descended anyway, landing hard enough to crack asphalt. The crowd froze, not in terror but in attention. Cameras rose, phones recorded. "Go home," Homelander ordered. People hesitated. That hesitation spread through him like a virus. One man near the front spoke up, voice shaking but audible. "Why should we?" The question wasn't defiant. It was sincere. Homelander stared at him, searching for the familiar spike of adrenaline, the chemical rush of being feared. It didn't come. "You're protected because of me," Homelander said. The man shook his head. "No, we're protected because you don't want to look bad." That landed. Homelander left without another word. That retreat didn't spark celebration. It sparked realization. Fear had finished choosing. It wasn't afraid of Homelander anymore. It was afraid of what happened when Homelander wasn't enough. Vaught's stock plummeted by double digits before noon. Government partners began issuing carefully worded statements about reassessing strategic dependencies. SUPs requested independent contracts. Some simply disappeared. In his apartment, the man watched the news while eating cold noodles, mildly annoyed at the interruption. He didn't recognize himself in the discussions. The theories felt disconnected, like they were talking about someone else entirely. He turned the volume down. Somewhere far above the city, Homelander screamed. Not aloud, not physically. Internally. For the first time, he understood what he'd been sensing all along. Fear hadn't left. It had just stopped needing him. And once fear found a new target, the system, the illusion, the lie, it didn't look back. The world was reorganizing itself around that truth. And Homelander, for all his power, was no longer at the center of it. Power didn't disappear. It flared. That was Homelander's mistake. By the 10th day, the silence had become unbearable. The absence of fear wasn't neutral, it was corrosive. It ate at Homelander's sense of reality, thinning the air around him until every interaction felt staged, every smile rehearsed. People still obeyed, still stepped aside, still nodded when he passed. But it was compliance without belief, and belief was the fuel. So he decided to remind the world. The incident was small by his standards. A hijacked armored truck outside the city. 3 armed men, no hostages, no broadcast urgency. A problem local law enforcement could have resolved in an hour. Homelander arrived anyway, punching through the roof of the vehicle in a blur of red and white. The suspects didn't even have time to scream. He stood amid the wreckage, chest rising slowly, waiting for the surge. Cameras were already there. Drones hovered. A crowd gathered behind barricades. This was supposed to be easy. This was supposed to work. Applause came. Late, uncertain, polite. Homelander felt his jaw tighten. Later that evening, the footage ran across every major network. Analysts praised his efficiency. Vaught's PR department pushed talking points about decisive intervention and restored confidence. The language was perfect. The response was. Engagement metrics dipped after the first hour. Comment sections filled with something new, not praise, not outrage, but questions. Why was he there? Couldn't anyone have handled that? Is this what he's for now? Homelander watched the numbers fall in real time, each downward tick landing like a quiet accusation. Inside Vought Tower, executives felt the pressure spike. The board didn't meet officially, but side conversations multiplied. The word redundancy appeared in internal memos, buried beneath layers of jargon. Legal teams began drafting contingency plans that didn't assume Homelander's cooperation. No one told him. They didn't need to. He felt it when a regional soup declined to stand beside him at a press event, citing brand alignment issues. He felt it when a senator delayed a scheduled photo op indefinitely. He felt it when Ashley stopped making eye contact. Homelander's response escalated. Not violently, symbolically. He inserted himself into moments that mattered emotionally rather than strategically. Memorials, funerals, disaster anniversaries. He spoke about sacrifice, about protection, about duty. The words were correct, the delivery flawless. The effect was wrong. People listened the way they listen to a speech they've already heard, nodding without investment. Cameras lingered, but the footage didn't spread. Clips were shared ironically, remixed, stripped of reverence. Power was being archived. The boys noticed the change immediately. "He's trying to get back on the poster," Frenchie muttered, watching a muted broadcast. "But the poster don't scare anyone anymore," MM replied. Huey leaned back uneasy. "This is the dangerous part." Butcher frowned, thought this was the good bit. "No," Huey said quietly. "This is when people with power realize attention isn't guaranteed." Back in the residential block, the man remained untouched by the storm orbiting him. He went grocery shopping. He argued with a cashier over expired coupons. He slept through a protest marching 2 streets over. Someone spray-painted a crude mural nearby, a faceless figure standing beside Homelander, untouched by shadow. The man walked past it the next morning without stopping, more concerned about being late for coffee. Homelander saw the mural that afternoon. He hovered in front of it, silent, heat vision restrained by sheer force of will. The faceless figure didn't mock him. It didn't threaten him. It simply existed beside him, equal in space if not in power. That equality was intolerable. He tracked the man again, not with satellites or surveillance teams, but personally. He followed him from above, watching mundane actions unfold with growing frustration. There was no pattern, no secret, no plan. Just indifference. Homelander landed in front of him outside a cafe, blocking the door. The street froze, tension snapping tight. "You," Homelander said. The man blinked. "Oh, hi again." People filmed. Homelander leaned in, lowering his voice. "You don't get to be nothing." The man frowned, genuinely confused. "I don't think that's up to you." The words weren't defiant. They weren't brave. They were factual. Homelander straightened slowly, acutely aware of the cameras, the crowd, the waiting world. Any violence now would confirm every fear Vought was trying to redirect. So he did nothing. Again. That second hesitation mattered more than the first. The footage spread faster than anything else he'd done that week, not because it was dramatic, but because it was incomplete. People replayed it, searching for the moment something should have happened and didn't. Power had tried to be seen. And failed. By nightfall, international partners announced independent oversight committees. Vought issued a carefully worded denial that satisfied no one. SUPs began renegotiating contracts with exit clauses. Homelander stood alone atop the tower, city lights flickering beneath him like distant stars, finally understanding the shape of the problem. Fear had moved on. And power without fear was just spectacle. The world wasn't waiting for him anymore. It was watching to see what broke next. Systems didn't panic. People did. That distinction mattered because by the time anyone noticed what was happening inside Vought, the decisions had already been made. Not in boardrooms, not in dramatic late-night meetings. They were made quietly, asynchronously, by departments protecting themselves from an outcome they refused to name. Legal moved first. Entire clauses were reinterpreted overnight, liability frameworks adjusted to shift accountability away from any single asset. Insurance policies were rewritten with language so vague it bordered on meaningless. Internal memos stopped using Homelander's name directly, referring instead to legacy deployments and high-variance entities. Homelander felt it as distance. Requests stopped coming, not abruptly but through omission. He wasn't excluded, he was bypassed. Rescue operations proceeded without notifying him. Crisis response teams filed reports that didn't require his approval. He could still intervene. No one was stopping him. That was the point. Inside Vought Tower, Ashley sat alone in her office long after everyone else had left, staring at a spreadsheet that tracked public trust indices. Homelander's line hadn't collapsed. It hadn't risen either. It had flattened, stubborn and inert. Flatlines terrified institutions. She closed the file and opened another, Project Continuity. It wasn't new. It had always existed, buried under layers of assumption that it would never be needed. A plan for a world where Homelander was present but no longer central. The system didn't need him gone. It needed him irrelevant. That strategy rippled outward. Government agencies announced new oversight bodies with overlapping jurisdictions, carefully designed to diffuse authority. SUPs were offered revised contracts emphasizing autonomy and accountability. Vought spokespeople began praising collective heroism in interviews, subtly reframing the brand away from singular dominance. Homelander watched it all unfold with mounting clarity. They weren't betraying him. They were adapting. The boys recognized the shift instantly. Butcher hated it. "They're sidestepping him," he growled, "like he's a dodgy step on the stairs." MM nodded. "Makes sense. You don't remove a load-bearing wall while the building's occupied. You reinforce everything around it." Huey stared at the feed, uneasy. They're not trying to beat him. They're trying to survive him. That survival instinct reached the public next. News cycles began framing Homelander as a variable rather than a solution. Risk analysts discussed over-reliance on singular deterrence. Academic panels debated decentralization of power. The conversation wasn't hostile. It was clinical. Homelander tried to interrupt it. He appeared at a joint task force briefing unannounced, hovering just above the floor, cape brushing polished concrete. The room stiffened, but no one fled. That absence of panic landed hard. "You didn't call me," Homelander said. The task force lead, a civilian analyst with no combat training, met his gaze without bravado. "We didn't need to." Homelander waited for the fear to arrive. "It didn't. We're handling it," the analyst continued, gesturing to a screen filled with logistics and response timelines. "This situation doesn't require escalation." Homelander's jaw tightened. "Everything requires escalation." The analyst shook her head. "Not anymore." That sentence echoed longer than it should have. Homelander left without incident, the room exhaling only after he was gone. The footage didn't leak. No one felt the need to share it. Power ignored was power diminished. In the residential block, the man sensed the quiet long before he understood it. The watchers never returned. The phone stopped receiving updates. Even the rumors faded, replaced by new anxieties chasing fresh headlines. He enjoyed the silence. One afternoon, he noticed someone had scrubbed the mural off the wall down the street, leaving behind a faint outline where paint had once been. He paused, squinting at it, then shrugged and kept walking. He didn't miss it. Homelander did. He flew lower now, closer to the city, scanning faces for something he could recognize. Fear still existed, but it had splintered. People feared systems failing, economies collapsing, institutions lying. They feared unpredictability. They no longer feared him specifically. Vought finalized project continuity under a new name, buried beneath layers of corporate rebranding. Homelander wasn't removed from the structure. He was reclassified. A contingency. That was the moment he understood. They weren't choosing sides. They were choosing survival. And survival didn't require worship. It required redundancy. Homelander stood atop the tower that night, watching lights flicker on across the city, realizing the system he'd ruled had quietly decided it would rather adapt than kneel. The world wasn't building toward a confrontation. It was moving on. And that, more than any rebellion or uprising, was something he had no idea how to fight. Below him, life continued, messy, decentralized, unconcerned. The system had made its choice. It would endure, with or without him. The world didn't end. That was the cruelest part. There was no final battle to mark the transition, no city-shattering moment that history could point to and say, that's when everything changed. Instead, the shift completed itself the way erosion does, quietly, inevitably, without ceremony. Weeks passed. Homelander remained in the sky, visible but unused. He responded when directly summoned, which happened less and less. He attended events that still wanted his image, which were fewer each day. He stood beside officials who no longer relied on him, only tolerated his presence because removing him outright was too dangerous to consider. He wasn't defeated. He was obsolete. Vought survived by shedding skin. Entire divisions dissolved under the guise of restructuring. Executives resigned into obscurity, replaced by committees and consultants who spoke in neutral language and never used Homelander's name unless legally required. Project continuity became policy. Singular dominance was officially framed as an outdated model. The company didn't apologize. It evolved. Governments followed suit. Oversight frameworks expanded. Redundancy replaced deterrence. SUPs were folded into layered systems where no single figure mattered more than the whole. The illusion of control shifted from a godlike enforcer to a web of institutions that could fail without collapsing entirely. The public adapted faster than anyone expected. Crime dropped, not because people were afraid, but because spectacle lost its pull. SUPs hesitated before acting, aware that every move would be dissected without reverence. Power no longer guaranteed narrative control. Fear didn't vanish. It matured. The boys disbanded quietly, not in victory, not in defeat. There was nothing left to dismantle the way they understood it. Butcher tried to stay angry, tried to find a target worth the effort, but rage without an enemy rotted inward. He walked away before that happened. Huey understood what the others didn't. This wasn't justice. It wasn't balance. It was entropy. In the residential block, the man packed a single bag one morning and left. No one stopped him. No one tracked him. The systems that once watched him had been repurposed. Their attention needed elsewhere. He took a train out of the city, staring out the window, mildly irritated by the delay. The news played silently on a screen above the aisle, analysts discussing a world adjusting to a new normal. He didn't recognize himself in the conversation. He didn't know he'd been a fulcrum. He didn't care. Homelander watched the train depart from miles away, vision locked on a dot that meant nothing to anyone else. He could follow. He could intervene. He could still end things violently if he chose. But the choice no longer meant what it used to. Killing the man wouldn't restore fear. It would confirm irrelevance. That realization settled deep, heavier than rage ever had. Homelander descended to the tower one last time, landing softly on the roof where he'd once stood as an unquestioned symbol. The city looked smaller now, not weaker, quieter, less impressed. No one looked up. Inside the building, his access still worked. That too was intentional. Removing it would have been a statement. Leaving it untouched was policy. Ashley passed him in a corridor and froze out of habit. Then she relaxed, nodded once and kept walking. That nod said everything. Homelander entered a boardroom that no longer waited for him. Screens displayed projections, long-term strategies, futures that didn't center on his silhouette. No one stopped talking when he arrived. He stood there for a long moment. Then he turned and left. He didn't announce his departure. He didn't threaten consequences. He didn't make a speech. He rose into the sky and flew until the city blurred beneath him, until the landmarks lost meaning, until the sound of human life faded into static. He hovered at the edge of the atmosphere, alone in a way he had never been before. For the first time, there was no audience, no fear to feed on, no system waiting to obey. Below him, the world continued, not safer, not kinder, but no longer structured around his existence. Institutions adapted, people adjusted, power redistributed itself into forms that didn't need a face. Homelander understood then that fear had never belonged to him. He had only been its loudest expression. And once fear learned it could survive without him, it didn't come back. He remained where he was, suspended between earth and nothing, a god without worship, a weapon without a war, finally grasping the truth no one had dared say aloud. Power that must be believed in is already dying. The world didn't need him gone. It needed him unnecessary. And it had succeeded.